joining. Put that on pause. Go ahead, everyone. You can still keep typing. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, to this evening's YANA program series on conversations with social impact leaders. Thank you very much, everyone who registered and who's joining us. And if you're watching this after the program, thank you for patching in to watch the video. My name is Rachel Littman, Yale College class of 91, and I am your host for this evening. We are honored and delighted to kick off the series with Rick Levin, Yale's 22nd president, who served there in the presidential role from 1993 to 2013, although he's there for decades before that as a faculty member and departmental leader. He's also the former CEO of an online education company, which many of you have heard of, called Coursera. He's a renowned economist and a thoughtful global social impact leader. Before I jump into questions with Rick and introduce him, just wanted to cover a few logistics. The program is being recorded, and again, we'll have this up on our YouTube channel, so you can share it or go back and watch later. We will be monitoring the chat functions throughout. Hopefully, we've opened it up so you can chat with each other and with us, but we would ask that formal questions for Rick, or if you would like us to ask, please put that in the Q&A section. We will do our best to get to as many of those as we can after the moderated portion, which should take about 30 minutes, but there should be plenty of time for us to engage with all of you. So please go ahead. If you're just joining us, we ask you to go ahead and put in your Yale affiliation if you like, your class year, and where you're patching in from. Could be city, state, country, just to give us an idea of where we're coming from. So thank you. So Rick, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. For sharing your time and your wisdom. And I have to note that YANA, as a shared interest group, really is a product of your leadership that started while you were at Yale, and during the whole concept of shared interest groups have really flourished since then. So I feel like we've kind of come full circle, that we now have this network of 9,000 like-minded, mission-driven Yaleys who are all coming together. And we're very honored, and I hope you feel some sense of accomplishment to see kind of what you've left.
Well, it's terrific what you're all doing. And, I'm certainly strongly supportive, as I was when we first started. So that's
great. No, it's a real testament. So I thought we would jump right in and start with your career. And obviously people had hopefully some time to read through. You hopefully know who Rick is and know his history, but let's talk about it, your career kind of development along the way, and in a way that would be helpful to members of our audience. We've got folks from lots of different stages of social impact careers. And you've had this outstanding and really varied career, including, economist and academic, departmental and graduate school leader, rising to president of a major institution like Yale, CEO of Coursera, which was a startup, and now it's a several $100 million organization. You've been involved with high-profile public panels and commissions, like the Iraq Intelligence Commission and that economics-related panel related to Major League Baseball, which we understand is a real sweet spot for you. Also members of corporate and philanthropic foundation boards. And for those who don't know, that's ranged from American Express to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, other nonprofits you've been involved in, and now on AI companies. And we look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. But let's say for those, if you can think about this, for those in our audience who are just starting out their careers, what lessons do you remember learning from these early stages? And it could be from your entire career or from like each new stage. What are some early lessons that you would impart?
Lessons all along the way. I think I'd start with my mother, who I think had the virtue of being a very good listener. She was deeply interested in people, very empathetic, and really paid attention to what people were saying and try to understand what was behind it. And I think I learned from her the importance of having those skills. Deep listening, I think, is a really important attribute of a listener, of a leader. And then, of course, the next step for a leader is to be able to take what you hear and come up with your solution to the problem at hand. And what I found is the fact that if you can explain why you've made decisions and in a way that makes clear that you've heard even those who weren't initially in favor of that decision, that makes a huge difference. So communicating, I heard you and I know you'd like to see it A, but actually here are 3 reasons why I think it's going to have to be B, and I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I did hear what you said. that is, I think, extremely important. And so that was the first part of it, at least the listening part and the empathy part were really, I attribute to my mother. I think, what else? I mean, another important skill, communication skills are extremely important. And I was fortunate to have, just incredibly really rigorous and demanding teachers of writing, both in my high school English classes and in history. And that was also been a hugely important skill. So that be able to think clearly, lay out an argument, communicate it clearly to people in terms that people can comprehend. All that's just communication skills. So listening and communication skills are two lessons learned early. I mean, even before college, that were important. I learned as a young assistant professor, I would say, I had the sort of rare benefit of being on a university-wide committee on a very important subject, which was the standards for promotion to tenure, and that was chaired by Jim Tobin, one of my mentors and a person that I love dearly. And I was one of the few assistant professors actually on, non-tenured professors actually on this group. What I learned from him was that, serious questions in an organization, in this case, a university, need to be tackled with all the same intellectual horsepower as you would use in your scholarly work. That is, our report was, in many ways, a learned treatise on the nature of university faculty and what the standards should be and why they were important, why they mattered. I think, a lot of argument within the committee to come up with the right answers, but that report has endured basically unchanged now for a little over 40 years. So it just led me to recognize that, and when I became president, I enunciated this to the people on my staff and throughout the university staff, that we're going to make decisions. We're not going to make decisions here arbitrarily. We're going to make decisions based on the same kind of rigorous reasoning that we would expect to happen in our seminars. That this is and in fact, I conducted my staff meetings, my senior team, and my meetings of the deans in the same way. I mean, they were seminars, and we together searched for the right answer. And I think it's a style of leadership that I think maybe won't suit everyone, but I found it enormously productive. And in the university,
you find that worked in non-academic settings as well?
I used exactly the same techniques at Coursera. Yes.
It's interesting. I don't know.
It was very new to them. That didn't to the people with some experience in tech companies. They were used to sort of extremely egotistical leaders who often made arbitrary decisions without much explanation, but not my style.
And they came around to it.
Oh yeah. Well, of course, everybody loved it because they felt like they were really participating and they were having a voice.
You have a kindred, I'm sure you have many kindred spirits, but Marta Teato, who is a PhD grad from Yale and who's on the Yale Board of Trustees currently, right, is the CEO of Consumer Reports, and she just gave one of our plenary sessions at the YANA program. Right. And she mentioned bringing that same kind of intellectual research and rigor to business meetings and stuff, and kind of shifting the culture and stuff. So it's very interesting you both have taken some of this. It sounds like it leads to very strong and practical and enthusiastic leadership style that would get other people to come along. Maybe not right away, but ultimately gets you closer to the truth or getting to good, solid answers. What about
a lot's made of having charisma. I'm not a person with a lot of charisma, but I think I got a lot of respect over time by having this style of sort of relatively low key, but seriously paying attention to what people were saying, understanding different constituencies, and trying to come to reasoned decisions and explaining them. And not everybody agrees with every decision, but there are lots of people around on the faculty and the alumni body who would say, I did a pretty good job, even though they didn't agree with everything I did.
Then you can't ask for much better than that.
Yeah.
What about for folks in our audience who are in kind of mid-career, you had mentioned before that you always took very concerted efforts and purposeful opportunities to achieve leadership. How did you sort of strategize in thinking about developing your own career along your pathway?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it wasn't exactly all serendipity, but on the other hand, some of it was. That is, I tended to get given leadership assignments. It just became like when I was a first-year assistant professor. Shockingly, the economics department asked me to run the big freshman course that had, whatever it had, 450, 500 students in small sections. So there were there were like 17 different instructors. Some of them taught 2 sections. So I was supervising a staff of all, mix of graduate students and other assistant professors who were teaching in this course. So some of the leadership within the university started pretty early. There were a few strategic decisions I had to make along the way, not a lot, but I was asked by Benno Schmidt to be dean of the School of Management in 1986 in his first year on the job, and I've been at a joint appointment there for the past 6 years. But I really had my anchor, and I love teaching it. So actually, let me be clear about that. I really enjoyed it. But at that point, before I'd ever been a department chair, to jump to dean, I felt I said no, and I said no mainly because I felt that wasn't where my center of gravity was. That my heart was really with the arts and sciences, having been educated as a humanist, then later turned economist. I just felt it was more where I wanted to put my leadership energies. And so, sure enough, the next year the economics department chairmanship came open, and I took on that job, much smaller job, but nonetheless one I learned a lot in as well.
And maybe going back to that first example you gave, taking over the Econ 101, and then all the way up to taking on the presidential role of the university, did you feel like you were ready when that kind of new leadership position came around?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote about this in the, people should know that I did write about my first 45 years up to the point of taking the presidency in a piece in the May-June alumni magazine, which, if you want to read it and you haven't already,
we'll get in the chat.
Read the online version, not the print version, because it's twice as long, and it's not that long, but the magazine cut it quite a bit. I talked about that. I did, by the time I was chair of the economics department, I sort of figured, I love doing that. I wasn't in any hurry to change, but I also knew that there was a long tradition of economists as provosts at Yale. 3 of my colleagues, Dick Cooper in the 70s and Bill Brainerd in the 80s and Bill Nordhaus in the 90s had, or late 80s, had all been provosts. And I thought that was sort of the natural thing for what economists did if they had any leadership talent. And I never really thought about being president, but then in 1992, just a year before, in the spring, so it was just before Benno Schmidt resigned. I was the chair of the search committee at Stanford, who was then looking for president, my undergraduate alma mater, and the chair of the board, flew out to New Haven to have dinner with me. And I thought, well, that was pretty interesting, and was pretty far along in the year. So it was clearly I was on their screen somehow. Had a great conversation with these people talking about higher education and what could what I saw as sort of Stanford's opportunities. And at the end of the conversation, I sort of got the kind of, "Oh, young man, you'll go far," kind of pat on the back. I thought. And 2 weeks later, they announced Gerhard Casper, who was 15 years my senior and a really great choice to be the president of Stanford. And it taught me, I learned something in that conversation. I learned that actually I could do that job. I felt I handled their questions well. I actually had some vision and some ideas about how to lead at that level. And so when the Yale search started, literally a couple of months later, I felt I was kind of ready at that point.
Beautiful. And we'll come back to some of the specific things that you learned and implemented while you were president of Yale. But I want to kind of sort of finish up this conversation thread about kind of the career path. And at what point did you decide that it was time to move on from this particular role, and then going from such a large institution, and then I know you've written about the sort of circumstances in which you joined Coursera was smaller, but what was that whole kind of transition phase like for you from stepping down from the Yale role to doing, transition to a smaller organization in a way that would, if other people are kind of facing similar kinds of transitions?
So first of all, let me make it clear, the transition wasn't
immediate.
planned that way. That is,
Right.
I stepped down and went off and took a sabbatical leave at Stanford to sort of get out of town and let Peter have the place to himself. And and during that, 6 months into that, well, 4 months into that, sort of in January, I got recruited to Coursera. So it wasn't like I stepped down with the intention of doing it.
Sure.
The decision to step down, I actually wrote an essay about that too. It's published in some obscure book with collected essays of a bunch of college professors on different aspects of the job. And so it's very interesting that I was intrigued about what was the right length, how long should a president serve fairly early on. And in the 90s, maybe 5-6 years into my own tenure as president, I asked Henry Schacht, who was a fellow with the corporation, I said, how do you know, whether you should stay longer or leave? And he, who had been CEO of Cummins Engine for 23 years, told me just great advice. So for anybody in your audience, this is great advice. I think, you start with an agenda. Presumably, if you're doing things right, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 major objectives to accomplish when you start the job, the things that are highest priority on your screen. And 5-6 years into the job, you really should ask yourself, do I have a second agenda? Presumably at that point, you've actually either completed or made very substantial progress on that first agenda. And, an organization needs dynamism, and it needs new ideas, and it needs new directions all the time to feel vital and alive. And so the question was, did I have a second agenda? And sure enough, I did. I already had the second agenda when he gave me this advice, but there it was, after about 5 years in. Agenda 1 was fix the buildings and fix the relations with New Haven, and agenda 2 was science and international, and agenda 3 was expand the colleges, expand the enrollment. But I did keep reinventing. And when it came to time to think about my 20th year, entering my 20th year in the job, I thought, do I have more ideas? And the answer was yes, I actually did have more ideas. I wasn't out of ideas. And so I didn't really take Henry Schacht's advice, although it had served me well up till that point. And instead, the epiphany came on a hiking trip in the Alps, where Jane and I would go every summer to get away for a really disconnected vacation in the high mountains. And I thought about this. I thought, at my 10th anniversary, the corporation gave a big party for me and invited all the deans and some of my faculty friends and all the former trustees. And it was a big gathering in the nave of Sterling Library, and very celebratory. And the theme on everybody's mind was stay 10 more years. That's what everybody said. Everybody wanted, keep going. You're on a roll. Keep going. And so then I thought to myself, okay, April is this is in July of 2012. I'm thinking in April of 2013, they're going to want to do a 20th anniversary party, right? And what's everybody going to be thinking then? And I thought, they're going to be thinking, well, how long is he going to stay? Is he going to lose? So I preempted that.
There you go.
This was it. It was a natural time to go.
Oh, okay. Thank you for sharing that. Let's dive a little bit into some of
that party became a retirement party.
I was going to say, you probably had just as good of a party, just slightly different things, and maybe you can invite more people there. Right. We get a lot of questions, and I see some in the Q&A, fundraising. Any nonprofit, including an institution like Yale, has to worry about bringing money in. It doesn't you have to go out and make these asks, and you've obviously had some world-class experience. You've developed some skills. And to the extent that it's relevant to a lot of us who have to go out and do that, did making the asks, to the extent you had to do that from time to time, come naturally, or were there specific skills or methodologies you used when you did that? And what are some tips that could help people be better fundraisers?
Yeah, thank you. I found fundraising sort of easy and pleasurable. And part of it, let's go back to my mother, the sort of listening thing, which is many people go into a fundraising conversation, and this is important for all of you nonprofit leaders out there. When you've got a pitch in mind, there's something you want to get from a person. But I found in fundraising conversations, and frankly, in just about all other conversations of the type that I want you to do this for me, that the way to start is not by making the pitch. The way to start is by asking the potential donor or the person you're trying to persuade about themselves. The Yale alumni are really interesting people, and and particularly the ones that are in a position to give $1 million or more, they've done something in their lives to that has warranted that capacity. So I would always start with tell me about your Yale experience. Tell me about the things that really mattered to you on campus. What are your interests? What are you, do you like, are you are you interested in the environment? Are you interested in the athletics, athletics? Are you interested in music and or drama or visual arts? Just get people talking, about. Now it's easier for Yale because the thing is we have something that needs money in virtually every category of human activity. So it's a little easier than just going in and saying, I'm working on climate change and I need money for climate change, because there you really have to persuade them of one particular thing. Whereas I had a menu that was a mile long, so I could accommodate just about anybody who wanted to give something and find something that matched their interest. But I still think that even if you do have a specific, you're working in a fairly narrow area, that it's good to start by asking about the person. People donors like to talk about themselves for the most people like to talk about themselves. So you're letting me talk about myself, I always thought that was a good strategy for opening people up. Yeah.
Did you find that approach also worked when you were doing something on the kind of more for-profit side, even though it was a B Corp for Coursera, when you actually had to go out and raise investment funds, or did you take a slightly different approach?
I certainly used something similar to that in sort of the one-on-one conversations. But so typically the pitching for fundraising was, come talk to to our partnership meeting on Monday morning. And so I'm sitting there with 10 or 15, or in one case 60, people online and stuff. And there you really are expected. There you present your pitch deck. So that's a different style, and it take that, like any presentation of that type. Your folks know all that. People in the audience know how to do that. I think you need conviction, enthusiasm, and sort of a great story to tell.
And what about when you come back maybe to organizations that you're not necessarily in charge of, maybe some of these other nonprofits that you do on the side with your family, educational institutions? Have you been asked?
Yeah, I've raised money for my kids' schools in New Haven, for most recently for the summer camp that my sons and now grandsons attend, and there it's the same. There it's sort of, what's your connection to the institution? Like if you're a parent at a school, or parent, or you experience it yourself, you're an alum. Start people by talking about their experience, what mattered to them. I just raised money. I was just on the reunion fundraising committee for my Stanford 55th reunion.
Well, they're getting a lot of good work out of you then. I'm lucky for that. I'm sure you put that to good use. I also want to ask a question about it while we're in the sort of fundraising, and you've also sat for a long time and chaired the board of the Hewlett Foundation. What is it like being on that side of the grant giving, and what, if anything, could you share as a general principles for those nonprofits who are always chasing grants, as far as what that process, and not just particular to Hewlett, but maybe just generally what works, what doesn't when you're making.
I think I really admire the Hewlett Foundation. I served for 20 years, and I think the ethos at that foundation is among the best among charitable organizations, large charitable organizations, because they, unlike some, and I won't name names, but unlike some foundations, they are not trying to fit every grantee into the Procrustean bed made by the program officer. I mean, basically, so often the program officer has an agenda, and he wants people to do the things on his or her agenda. That's lousy philanthropy in my book. I mean, what you want to do is find great people doing important things, and give them money to do the things they want to do, as long as they're consistent with your overall objectives. So Hewlett has funding programs in climate, in conservation of Western lands, in global development, in K through 12 education, and in the arts in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And a very high, not all, but a very high percentage of, and now a new program in democracy, a very high percentage of our grants are general, just general operating grants. There's no strings. You just, it's for your general purposes. Continue with your agenda, and that's by far the most welcome funding from a nonprofit entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
You want, it gives you the flexibility, and it allows you to fill in the gaps. If you do get program specific funding for something, then you've got some money to cover the other things that you want to cover. So I think that's, if you were on the other side and doing in a charitable organization, I would be, urging you to all try to move people toward general operating grants. The nonprofit leaders, such as are in this audience, know a lot better than the program officers what needs to be done in their area, and they're on the ground, and they see the opportunities and the problems, and it's much more sensible, I think.
That's very encouraging. I think we've started to see a little bit of trend of that, and I'm sure people in the audience are happy to hear that also from someone who sat on that side. While we're on the topic of kind of the operations of a nonprofit, we know a lot of them do, and as many businesses do, kind of strategic plans. Have you, and annual retreats and hiring consultants and how to do what they do? Many of them don't necessarily perhaps turn out to be as effective or even implemented the way maybe some of the reports and things that you were orchestrating at Yale. Have you come across anything like that with other nonprofits, or have times where you've done it where it didn't turn out to be as effective as some of these very specific, like the tenure decision report? And any suggestions,
I've been
if you're not in
involved.
an academic institution, to get those to actually be purposeful?
Well, first of all, a lot of this depends on the size of the organization, like, and the complexity. University-wide strategic plans are mostly nonsense, and they mostly, like, if you look at them 5 years later, you can't even remember that you wrote it. I never attempted a university-wide strategic plan. I did encourage deans to excuse me, I got a phone call. It's interrupting. Yep. Okay. I did encourage deans to develop strategic plans for their schools. Okay. And I thought at that level, in a smaller organization, some of the professional schools, especially, not the arts and sciences and the graduate school, but where, we were talking with faculty of some 50 or 100 people and student bodies of 300 or 400 people, that was actually possible to do a kind of grassroots strategic plan where we actually solicited inputs from lots of people and came up with goals. But at the university level, I worked more, a little more top down. We had a very rigorous goal setting framework that I put in place at Yale that started with me presenting my objectives, the things I wanted to see done over the next year to the, I do this every year, to the corporation. And then I rolled that up into, I had 5-year goals, and then, which we typically revisited maybe halfway in. And, but meanwhile, so you really started with the 5-year objectives. Then you organized your annual objectives under those headings for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part. And then my annual goals, which were developed in collaboration with my officer team, which was varyingly 6 to 9 people over my tenure, we cascaded those down in the sense that once we debated and solidified those, we shared them with the deans, who then in turn developed their own annual goals based on, to be consistent, not to be enslaved by, but to be consistent with the larger goal. So to give some good examples, certain university-wide objectives, like, in the first years especially, get your unit, whether it's the art gallery or the drama school or the athletics department, to do something instructive and useful in strengthening the relationship between Yale and New Haven, and maybe in educating young people in the city, or whatever was your, wherever you could make a contribution. Nothing was dictated, just among your objectives for the year should be something you want to do in New Haven that would be constructive. And later, when we moved on, internationalization was the same thing. We had large goals for the university as a whole, but we asked every unit to sort of, what are you going to do this year about internationalization? So I think that's kind of a that's not strategic planning quite, but it's strategic goal setting and cascading down.
And following up, I assume that's only as good as their regular.
Well, there's accountability. So I would have a conversation with all of these deans and directors of major units at the beginning of the year, in August and September, and then a sort of report on how do we do in June, and with then a conversation leading to, okay, let's think ahead. What are we going to do? What do you think about putting into your goals for next year? And then so there are 2 conversations a year, basically, with, 20 different leaders to sort of help give them a little guidance, but basically let them lead their organizations.
But also hold them accountable to come back and have
accountable. Yeah, of course. Well, of course, if a person, I got to be. I developed some skill, and this might be useful as just a general leadership thing. You know, in the I mean, I can't remember an occasion where I directly fired anybody, but on the other hand, because the people that reported to me were pretty senior people with substantial reputations, and so it was always a conversation that led to encouragement that they look around for a new opportunity, and in almost every case, they found the new opportunity and left as if that was it, even though, so you don't know who the people I fired. Like nobody in the Yale community knows who I fired because they all landed on their feet, which was great.
Good.
And they're
That really kind of gets into this, like, further question we wanted to get into a little bit about how do you approach, labor relations may be different than managing unions or working with community, but direct staff, and whether it's something large at the university or something smaller at someplace like Coursera. What are some of the philosophies? And we're starting to pick up some of your style, but things you were conscious about in either hiring a team, setting up your team, and managing people underneath you. What were your style?
well, hiring, in hiring, I think I have a lot in common with Dave Swenson, who's written about this extensively about hiring investment managers. Character, that comes first. I mean, I wanted people that had a certain amount of humility, that were mission driven, and this is certainly relevant to any nonprofit leader. You want people that care more about the mission than about their own personal advancement. And to the extent that's possible, but we had a pretty good record. I mean, of hiring people that really did put the institution first, and then personal integrity is important, and personally, because it's my style, I like good listeners. I violated that occasionally for people that just had extraordinary talents. I mean, no one would say, and he wouldn't be insulted by my saying this, no one would say that Bob Stern is a great listener, but Bob Stern was a great dean, but because he was completely driven by he was just fanatically devoted to the institution, and he he's complete integrity, and of course was tremendously ambitious and hardworking, and just dramatically improved that school.
Beautiful. I'm going to ask a couple of questions maybe about some technology, international experience, and I want to remind folks that if you want to put some questions in the Q&A, we'll start fitting those in. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about your involvement and approach to use of technology and innovation. You were certainly an early adopter, as you mentioned, I think in the article, about your early days of teaching an economics course. And have implemented another way, but just curious what your general approach is to the use of technology, particularly in helping to effectuate and maximize social impact, either directly or globally. And what do you think for nonprofits who could take advantage of technology?
We've come a long way from punching IBM cards and sticking them in the machine in order to grade the problem sets of first-year students at Yale in 1975, whenever that was, 74. But I saw great potential in online education pretty much as soon as the internet was invented, and just thought, I mean, the driving philosophy was, we now have a tool that can be an enormous force multiplier for our faculty. That the typical faculty member teaches a load of, maybe they've got 2 small classes with 15 each in, maybe 1 graduate school student class and 1 undergraduate seminar, and then 1 or 2 lecture courses with 30 to 100 people in their class. So, maybe they reach 150 students a year, many professors fewer, and a few, and even the super popular ones, it's 400 or 500, so when it became clear that you could use this technology to give give our greatest courses to the world, to put these people on initially on tape, through the Open Yale program. Well, first all learned in the Open Yale program all in the 2000s. That this really it really made sense. I mean, you reach people all over the world with who were often got tremendously excited about the opportunity to learn from the finest minds in the world. And that really was we didn't have a successful business model in doing this. The All Learn couldn't break even at the beginning. Open Yale Courses was funded completely by grants from the Hewlett Foundation and the Sloan and the Mellon Foundation and a couple of others. But when Coursera and edX sort of emerged on the scene in 2012, I could see now we've got something really serious, because we had money behind this possibility of really scaling the educational power of universities. And that's why I took the Coursera job. I mean, I didn't expect to. There were two co-founders who were running it, but the venture capitalists decided I could be substantial value added, on that team. And it was great. And we've had just enormous social impact. I mean, 130 million registered learners today. And just the most amazing stories that they can tell, people all over the world from all walks of life, being able to do things, being able to get new opportunities that are quite extraordinary. I mean, young girl in India who never dreamed of going outside anywhere other than her local university, ending up at Princeton because she took a bunch of Coursera courses,
Amazing.
and a woman in Bangladesh who was a battered wife who escaped her husband, resettled in a new town, and decided she had to start a business. So she took a bunch of Coursera courses on business management and accounting, and set up a bakery, and now it's a thriving business. There are hundreds of these stories, and
That's beautiful.
it makes a huge impact, and many people are able to advance their careers in important ways through the courses. And in fact, mostly that's where the sweet spot is for Coursera and a lot of other related companies, the age 22 to 45 or so, where people are moving along or moving up in their careers and need new skills. They come to our courses and get promotions, get new jobs, take master's degrees online without having to give up their incomes, because they can do it part-time while they're working. So there's just great potential in it. It's phenomenal.
So I have to ask you, we've had a couple of questions. For example, Robert has asked us about your thoughts about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT on education. Talk about technology and education. Sure. What are your thoughts on that these days, and how that might be affecting learning?
Yeah, well, it was when online education first happened, when the first MOOCs happened, the massive online courses in 2012. The professorate's first reaction was, oh my God, this is terrible. They're gonna put us out of jobs, and there won't be any jobs left for our graduate students. Well, we've gotten over that. That's just not happening. And this is sort of the same. Oh my God, the students are all going to cheat. This is the first thing they thought about was, how am I going to detect plagiarism? How am I going to make sure the answers that the students are? Now, that's a legitimate worry, and already, at least a dozen companies, including Coursera, are working on, mechanisms to detect cheating in a much more sophisticated way than we've been able to do in the past, to sort of counter that tendency. But I look to the bright side there. Look at the way Google search changed the world, changed the way we all got access to information. You wouldn't say students should have to go to the library, get out an encyclopedia, and find the answer to this question that came up at the dinner last night or came up in the classroom this morning. You can Google it and you can get an answer. Well, ChatGPT is in some ways just an extension, or the large language models, just an extension of that, where instead of getting a list of places to look, you actually get, a few coherent paragraphs that then lead you to think further about
Place to start.
I mean, as long as we don't make, Chat GPT or the other large language models a complete substitute for thinking on your own, I think it can be very helpful. And so I'm not particularly terrified about it. I think we can use it and use it to good effect. Coursera is working on the large language models make much better the sort of in-course coaching functions that some of these online providers use now.
Sure.
When you get lost in a course, when you're having trouble or struggling, before the large language models, we did use machine learning to try to figure out, oh, this learner's stuck. And then we would give them hints, about what to look at. But now,
very useful for all sorts of online learning.
Yeah. But now you can do this in natural language. You can actually have a conversation with the machine about, you can say to the machine, I'm stuck on this problem. Where can I learn more about it? And it will give you a bunch of sources. Now, one of the advantages is we trained the model on our own data, on just the stuff that's in our courses. So it's not getting a lot of junk from the internet confused with
right. And you're not saying this would replace real live learning and tutoring with seminars?
No, I supplement. So. I mean, there'll be a lot of constructive uses. There's a lot of risks too. I mean, I understand that, Henry Kissinger's apoplectic about, this is going to cause nuclear war, but I don't know.
You're not as concerned. Well, you're obviously very engaged in technology and things that are going on for now. And I have to say, we have a lot of questions from our listeners who are later in their careers. For example, there's an SOMer, Kenny, who's approaching retirement, and people kind of want to know what's your advice about staying engaged and finding meaningful work beyond maybe a full-time, very demanding job. How are you doing that now? What are your ideas for your future, and what could you impart to others who may be at a similar point in their careers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm obviously very lucky because I've had this high visibility career. So opportunities come my way all the time, to be on boards or to serve in advisory roles with organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit. And so, I just have to balance how much of this do I want to do and how much time do I want for myself, and I would say, I mean, other people might say I'm working, 80% time, but I worked 200% time before. So really for me, it's like 40% time. That's the way it feels. So, but I think, if you're, for most people when they retire, they're not going to have 1,000 different opportunities. Just where people are seeking them. So recognizing that, just find, and these are your folks are all from the nonprofit world. So, okay, you've run your organization for 20 years, and now you're going to retire. And okay, but there's always places that would like volunteers to come in and help. And you can, when you're a volunteer, you pretty much call your shots. I'm going to give you 10 hours a week or whatever, and leave it at that. So I would say, this is a group, I'm sure, with a lot of passion about various causes, and they're bound to be constructive ways to keep contributing, I would think, short of running a larger organization. So,
and I will pitch for anybody in the audience who is looking to give back some skills. We have a roster of nonprofits and needs, and we do roundtables. We'd be happy to.
Is that a function of your organization?
It is, Yana. Yep, we're trying to start a nonprofit Yale alumni consulting kind of project. We've done. We've done roundtable sessions, and hopefully we've got a few nonprofits who get an hour of concerted time, and it's just been amazing what people have to contribute back and the networks they can bring offline. There's no way I would know that they had that other. So everybody on this call has value to give, and whether you need help with your nonprofit to give back, we could be that pinpoint for you. And I think, as Rick is saying, there's lots of places that could use your help. Can you pass on over to these? Yes, and some people do need to work. Some people making comments. Yes, and that's why I think, Rick, you were saying you have to know what your limit is. Do you have 10 hours of volunteer? Or do you need to be working? There are ways you can do it and still be helpful and impactful. One question I wanted to ask you about maybe is looking back over your career. Do you think is there anything you wish you'd spent a little more time on, or maybe a little less time?
Well, apart from being a better baseball player, so I could have played professional ball, I don't know.
I hear you.
Yes, there is, I think. I never did full-time government service, and I had a few opportunities. They always seemed to come at, all but one came at inauspicious times. A couple of opportunities before I had tenure, and I just thought, no, let me just keep my head down and get that done. And then actually I was asked to be on the Council of Economic Advisors under the first President Bush. Kind of an odd ask, because I made no secret of the fact I was a Democrat, but I was, I'm pretty moderate. And actually, I actually admired the economic policies of the first George Bush, who did some very courageous things, actually, and in terms of breaking his pledge not to raise taxes and doing it at the right time. But then, interestingly, even though other members of the council wanted me on and eventually asked me to do the job, somebody in the White House vetoed it because I was a Democrat. So I would have gone then. That was in 1990, I guess. I was chairing the economics department at the time. The President Obama tried to recruit me. Well, actually, both Bush 1 and Obama tried to recruit me to international leadership roles, and but I didn't want. It was the wrong time to leave Yale, and I didn't want to do that. And then President Obama tried to get me to come to do the National Economic Council. He'd be Larry Summers' successor, actually. I'm not. He didn't actually ask me to do the job. He asked me would I be willing to consider it. So I know there were other contenders, but that I was truly tempted to do that, because that was a really important job, senior White House economist. But it was the last year. It was the last year of our Yale campaign, and I knew I could bring it home and well beyond the goal if I stayed through that year. I would, we'd it would be our first $1 billion year, and sure enough, it was. But and if I'd left early in that year, that never would have happened. So,
well, we hope you don't regret that, because we can tell you we're all beneficiaries of you having stayed.
I don't regret that decision. I regret that I never did do the full-time public service.
Just as a general principle. Okay.
Yeah.
What are your hopes for the next generation of social impact leaders?
I think the nonprofit sector plays a huge role in doing things that the market's not going to deliver on, and I think keeping at it. I mean, we would be far behind where we are now on climate change if it weren't for the nonprofit sector having done so much of the important work there. I really believe that, and then there are all kinds of more. I'm less familiar with specific work of various kind of social justice organizations, but I think I think there's a lot of good done in that sector as well. So,
talking about the next generation, Thomas has asked us from the audience, that leadership seems to be all the rage in the academy these days. Do you think it's possible to teach leadership, whether in places like Yale or otherwise? Do we need to be doing more of that, or do you think the systems are set up pretty well that natural leaders will rise to the top?
I guess we have a test here. You could ask the audience whether anybody's learned anything from my talking for the past 45 minutes.
I think we did.
Well, then there's your answer.
There you go.
I mean, I think it's hard to teach leadership, but I think with case studies, with examples, with some framework, I think important lessons can be conveyed. I really do think that, actually, and I'm actually I'm doing some writing that might, I hope, contribute to that.
Good, good. On the environmental issue, you had mentioned briefly, is that Paul asks, or mentions that you were a pioneer in establishing environmental sustainability and a reduced carbon footprint as a major priority for Yale. And curious to know what led you to take that position. How do you think that's developed at Yale, maybe in other institutions over time?
That's a great story. I mean, I certainly read up on climate change and of course, Bill Nordhaus was my colleague for all those years. So I was not uneducated on the subject, but I didn't really think about it a lot. Big supporter of the then forestry, School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, but I didn't really have an agenda for the university. And this is one area, probably the most important area, where student initiative actually got me moving. And there was an undergraduate group.
That's good to hear.
That wrote up a paper in the early 2000s. I'm trying to think exactly when. Anyway, early 2000s, about what literally a blueprint for what Yale could do to combat climate change by kind of leading by example. And it had a number of suggestions for reducing our carbon footprint. It actually was less ambitious than what we ended up doing, but it gave me the idea that we ought to take this seriously. And the first thing we did was Alison Richard, who was the provost, set up a committee to work on this, and they had some good recommendations, and then there was a second student report done right in the wake of that had even more. It was more laid out of an even stronger blueprint, and I thought, this is good. I mean, why not? Why not? We're a teaching institution. We have a major program training environmental leaders, and why not do this model what large organizations need to do? And this was before people were talking about net zero, but we basically said, let's do what countries have at that point had pledged to do, which was not the United States, by the way, at that point, but what many countries had pledged to do, which was to reduce, this was in 2005, was to reduce carbon emissions in the next 15 years. So by 2020, to get down below 1990 levels of emissions. So by 2005, we were already way above, you're supposed to get 10% below 1990 levels, but we were like 43% above that. So we had a much more ambitious goal. And we adopted it, and we did a lot of, all the rest of our building projects from that point on, all the renovations were very sensitive to getting maximal environmental impact, or in particular carbon impact, from the work we did. And we essentially made it. And I mean, I was gone by 2020, but Peter carried it on, and we actually achieved the goal.
That's amazing. Now, there's always work to be done, but I'm glad you helped lay the framework for that. Well, we're at the end of our hour, and I just wanted to kind of just maybe end with an opportunity for you to share any other leadership lessons or related to maybe mistakes that you've learned from, or any kind of last points that you'd like to share with this audience you think would be helpful.
We've covered a lot, I think. I would say what we haven't mentioned, I think, of among leadership attributes is we talked about having be mission driven, but I think go along with that, to have a strong set of values that's consistent with the values of your institution. And I think in an academic institution, that means a couple of things. A place like Yale, it means a couple of things. It means being absolutely committed to excellence in our work, and to be a standard setter for the world in scholarship and in teaching, and it means I think creating an environment in which people can learn free of fear, free of in a way that is that's supportive of a full and free expression of all points of view. And I think we're right now in a moment in the university where that's a little under threat, because there's strong views on different parts of the political spectrum that want to silence the other person's point of view. And I mean, we're seeing it in spades with this recent Israel-Hamas business, but we've seen it also around race and around a number of other issues in the past few years. And universities are about encountering difference. That's what education is about. It's about learning, growing beyond your starting point. If you come into university with a particular set of values, they get challenged by what you read and what you learn and the other people you meet. And we should be able to have full and free exchange among people where there's no adverse consequence to expressing yourself. And I think not just Yale, but most of the elite universities have slipped on this dimension, and it's so fundamental to if we're going to advance knowledge, we have to be open-minded. We have to look at things from all sides. We have to weigh competing points of view and not ignore them and not silence them. And I think that's imperative. It's a good moment for Yale to think about these things, because we're looking for we're having a transition in the leadership, and I would think a new president who's committed to excellence and committed to preserving free and open inquiry and discussion is really important.
And to get back to some of your original points, hopefully to be a very good listener. And if everybody listened a little better, maybe we could avoid a lot of these things.
Agreed.
Well, thank you, Rick, for sharing your thoughts and your career with us. And I'm sorry for everybody in the audience, we couldn't get to every single question. And Rick, I know there were so many things we could have many separate conversations about a lot of your achievements and interests, but we very much appreciate you joining us. We hope to have you involved maybe in the future with other YANA programs. And thank you for help creating an environment where this kind of organization could be started, and to bring together all these Yale alumni around the world who are all mission driven and committed to making the world a better place. So lots of thank yous. Best of luck. Keep us posted in your future and current endeavors. And we hope to see you again soon.
Well, thanks, Rachel. I enjoyed the opportunity, and I hope the audience got something out of it.
Absolutely. Thanks. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you at the next program. Thank you.